Welcome back. It's been a while since you've seen an episode of Classis Wisconsin Weekly. While we were creating this new space, I'm hoping to rebrand as Classis Wisconsin Conversations. So there's not the pressure of a weekly videos, but hoping still to do something at least twice a month. We have our first episode back with Mark Buteyn of Bethel Christian Reformed Church, and maybe more well known at Central Wisconsin Christian, where he was head of schools for many years and is now recently retired. So, Mark, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your time at Central Wisconsin Christian and how that came to be, and we'll go from there if you don't mind. How'd you end up at CWC?
Oh my. Well, I'm a Waupun kid at heart. I mean, I grew up there. Attended Waupun Christian Elementary grades 1 through 8, and then went to CWCHS, Central Wisconsin Christian High School for grades 9 through 12. Had very typical kid experience for living in the 1960s and 70s, and I can't believe how long ago that is. That's ridiculous. And then went on to Calvin College and tried to not be a teacher. I have 4 siblings that also went into education. And so I tried for a couple of years to avoid that and that calling on my life. And the Lord is fairly persistent, as we know. And he called me into teaching, and I answered. And through a series of, circumstances that he brought to culmination, both my wife and myself got teaching jobs back in Waupun. After a period of time where we had looked nationwide, this was in 1982, there were far more teacher candidates than there were positions. And it so happened that a couple positions opened up in Waupun. While we were home at my parents' for spring break, and we were called into that type of ministry many years ago.
Early on, Mark, what subjects were you teaching, or what grade level?
Yeah, I taught grades 9 through 12. In a small school, you end up teaching a little of everything. My focus was social studies and physical education, primarily social studies, and a little bit of Bible, I guess, starting off. I know I taught Algebra 1 for a few years. I love teaching geography, and then I did Bible 9 and 10 and church history. So really quite a range of things, and probably about, I would say 4 months even into my first year, and the first year of teaching can just be incredibly miserable. But about 4 months, I figured out that, you know what, I was created to do this. And God brought such pleasure to me, even though it was a ton of work, but such pleasure and kind of completion in my life through my teaching career.
When did that switch to administration happen?
That happened after 26 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was in the classroom. I taught and I coached over the variety of things, girls track, boys basketball, over that period of time. And raised during that time my 2 sons. Our daughter Lexi was born 11 years after my sons came to us, and so there was quite a gap. But during that time too, there had been people that kind of knocked on my door and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about going into administration? And CWC needs a principal or whatever." And I really did a nice job avoiding it. and then in year 26, our current administrator at that time was retiring, was changing work, and again, God called. I was on the search team, but I was also praying about if this was the time that God was calling me into administration. And he gave a very clear answer that, yes, I am.
Wow. Who was the administrator before you? Just out of curiosity.
His name was Ron Homa,
Oh, okay.
and he had been our administrator for just 5 years. He had come from Iowa, and he and his wife moved up here, ran a B&B up in Appleton, but he served as administrator. I would say kind of in a bumpy time and an enrollment challenging time at CWC, and did a very nice job and kind of, I'll say, laid the foundation for me to come in.
It's interesting you bring that up. I'm up in Oostburg, and wife works at Sheboygan Christian, and both of those schools are really experiencing some blessing, and I know the same is true at CWC, and I've heard the same, from Racine and others, Delavan around the Classis as well. Maybe I would chalk that up to your leadership there at CWC, but both of us know, it's God who drives that bus. But what are some successes you've seen in your time there? Weathering the storm and some ups and downs, but where have you seen God's hand kind of guiding Central Wisconsin Christian in particular?
Sure. Well, yeah, you're keyed in on this too, Zach, right? This is all God's story, okay? And if, in fact, he uses us in his story, I guess all the better. Fantastic, right? You just humble yourself and say, live in me and through me. I guess if I look back and you say, what are the successes? It's really seeing young people grab hold of their faith and then transition into adulthood, begin their families, and have a vision that their lives are God-centered, right? And kind of the blessing of serving in one place over a long period of time is, some of those students I had in class became board members.
Wow.
Some of them became deacons while I was an elder in council, or some of them became elders while serving with me. And so that's really, I guess, the level of success that's not attributed to any one of us, but it's attributed to God's faithfulness. I think, and I see that in my own children, right? And now my grandchildren are entering their teen years, and you start to see them grab hold of the faith too.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely nothing more precious than that.
Yeah.
How about that? You can choke me up in one of these things.
It's happened before. Before. I've got a couple former students who are serving with me as deacons right now too, and it's just a special and really humbling experience to be a part of that formation in whatever small way. We're both, like you said, on the same page about God being the primary mover there. But yeah, you see former students away doing missions and just living radical lives following Jesus, and you're like,
yeah.
Man,
and sometimes it just, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just recently had an experience. I'd have to think, but here's what came to me is this feeling like I saw a young person and what they were doing with their life and their commitment and that type of thing. And I'm thinking, man, I wish I were there when I was 23 or 24 like they are. And right, so you get a real sense of just God's call on each and every life.
Yeah. So 26 years teaching. How many years in administration?
16.
Oh, wow. So over 40 years at CWC?
Yep, 42 years.
Holy cow. And I imagine, just being familiar with how the small school thing works, I imagine you did some teaching still while you were doing administration, or at least for some of those years?
I did for, yeah, kind of on and off for probably 4 or 5 years. What really happened in 2008, um, when I became, at that time we called it school administrator, is CWC began to grow.
Mm.
We started building projects, and so the demands on my time grew from an administrator standpoint. And so I did a little bit of teaching, did a little bit of coaching here and there. But probably by 2013, most of that had ended, and my last 11 years was pretty much all administration. But by nature, and maybe by the nature of CWC, it was pretty much hands-on too. It's not as if I lived in my office.
Right.
I'm much better living with the teachers and with the students and in and about. I think you're able to increase your effectiveness when you know people.
Yeah. Switching gears just a little bit, you attend at Bethel CRC, where I've seen you before. I know you've been an elder. Are you an elder now?
I'm not an elder now.
Oh,
no.
You're off. Enjoy the break. I'm sure you'll be up again soon.
We'll see.
Were you raised at Bethel CRC?
I was.
Wow.
I was baptized in First CRC in Waupun, and Bethel is a daughter church.
Right. I was going to ask that because that started only in like the 60s or the 70s, or am I off?
No, you're right on. In fact, we'll play some connecting points here. Just for right now, Bethel is considering a redesign of our sanctuary.
Sure.
At least a refurbishment, and they asked me to lead that design team, which of course I said, sure, I'll do that. But we had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and we're talking about the founding times of Bethel Church as a building, right? But also as a daughter church. And I said, I remember being, I think, 4 or 5 years old, having church at CWCHS at that time in the gymnasium.
Yeah.
And my family was in charge of setting up chairs and putting out Bibles and hymnals in that gym. And that's where we worshiped for a time while the actual Bethel Church building was being built.
Sure. So
that's going back to 65. And now we're in 2024, and we're talking about, well, what should the sanctuary look like, and what should worship look like today and going forward? And I love those conversations, but it's interesting. Everyone has a different vision, don't they? For what space should be like, and then what the actual worship should be like.
There's always some nuance and some subjectivity there. I've been part of some of those discussions as well. But so you've been a part of Bethel CRC its whole life.
Correct.
Wow.
Yes.
That's really neat. And obviously Bethel has a close connection with CWC, kind of sharing a parking lot, or just across a parking lot there. So special that you've been able to serve at those places for so many years. I'll ask you your best advice and how to make it in. I consider Christian school teaching ministry. I'm guessing you'd agree. So what's your advice? I mean, these days we see our favorite pastors kind of falling by the wayside every other day. What are some principles or some values of yours that helped you be faithful in ministry for 40 plus years?
Wow. I thought you were going in a different direction with that. That's okay. Say that last part again, please.
Yeah, you and I have something in common. I'm, serving in my home church. I'm a lifetime Oostburg guy, and so I see someone like me who's served his community and served the Lord for 40 years faithfully. How do you do that?
Sure.
What are some things that you got to keep in mind? What are some things to look out for? Like, what advice would you give someone like me?
Sure, I can be. I'll take the advice that I really believe that God gave me when I became head of school. Okay. Um, number one is simply humility. Know who you are and know who God is. Okay. If you know who God is, then knowing yourself um, keeps you in your place. Okay. And so humility, I think, is just so huge. Um, Secondly is transparency.
Mm.
And this I vowed, and I think it's true for ministers of the word as well, um, that you have to be authentic, and you have to say, you know what, I'm going to screw up, okay, but I'm going to be transparent about it. I'm not going to hide, um, and right, recognize my own faults, but then also be willing to admit my own faults to others. And in leadership, I think that's really huge, particularly whether you you are a part of a council or you're part of a board, like a school board. And then the third thing is don't worry about trying to please men. Okay, you serve one, and while I don't know why God so impressed that upon me, but He did.
Mm.
And so I can honestly say, and I don't mean this to be arrogant or anything like that, I did not worry about trying to make people happy.
Mm.
I tried to make good decisions with the information I had at that time. And that really became a real guidepost, particularly during the pandemic, right? Being a leader during the pandemic. I don't believe, at least in my lifetime, there was a more difficult time to be a leader, okay? Because first of all, nothing is going to make everyone happy. In fact, likely any decision you make isn't going to please anybody.
Right.
And then this whole idea that some people have is I have to make the right choice. I have to make the right decision. I'm so glad that I was led to believe, don't worry about that. Make a good decision based on the information you have today.
Yeah.
And so that's really, even today in my work and in my church life, I'm really trying to focus on making good decisions.
Yeah. All really great advice, Mark. Thank you. Before we go, just any updates about what's happening at Bethel CRC? We know Pastor Kurt's been there a year or two now, and it seems to be going well. Any new programs or exciting things worth sharing?
Well, first of all, Pastor Kurt's ministry already in 12 short months. I can't believe it's that long. It has just been a great blessing. He is passionate, dynamic, and just very, I want to say, community focused. And by that I don't mean Bethel in the Waupun community. I mean he wants the church to be the church. Okay, the body of Christ, and that not only do we have love for our Creator and Redeemer, but we have love for each other. And I've commented, I've said this to him as well already, how he does announcements from the pulpit, how he does prayer, concerns and praises, really, I'll say, knits us together in a unique way. Doesn't mean that's not what Jeff Brower did,
Sure.
Number of years ago. It's just a different point of emphasis. And so now, okay, my wife and I were traveling yesterday, right? We were not in person. We were listening in the car to this live stream, but now Sunday mornings, you just miss being with your family in church. Okay, so that's been just a huge blessing, and I think God's going to use that gift of Pastor Kurt in some amazing ways, okay, to bless our congregation and hopefully broader community in the world.
Cool.
I mentioned my role in the design team, and this is kind of a big deal for us, I'm not going to lie. Two challenges with it. I'll share those very simply. One is to do this while producing unity in the church, right? Everyone has their opinion of how you come in, what the space should be like, and what the worship should be like, and so we're laying out the heavy questions. Okay, our design team. Okay, you'd think we should be talking paint colors.
Yeah.
But we're talking, about what should worship be like.
Yeah.
And how do we choose unity? Okay, because unity is a choice. We are going to choose to love each other.
That's absolutely right.
Even as we change. Okay, and so on the one hand, okay, here's my philosophy type thing, okay, which might just blow people apart. People think this is about the color of carpet and the windows and that type of thing, but maybe, just maybe, God is far more concerned about our hearts and our choosing to love even while we disagree. And so I trust him, okay, that he's going to produce good things in the hearts of Bethel's people through this process. And what the sanctuary looks like afterwards, hey, it's fine. It'll be good.
It's secondary.
In my first meeting, I said, when people walk into that sanctuary, I want them to be able to love God, love others more fully, and be more equipped to serve in this world. Okay, that's what this is about. So now we have the hard work of, okay, let's do this.
Yeah. No, it's really good advice. We went through some of that not too long ago too, like a refurbishing of the sanctuary space, and I know, that fight for unity, right? Is like.
Do I dare ask if it went well?
It went well. I mean, and there are quarrelsome people. We call them opinionated. The Bible calls them quarrelsome, maybe. But you're gonna get me preaching. But I think the spiritual discipline of submission is almost completely lost on American Christians. Because we love individuality so much, individual freedom, right? I have an opinion and it matters more than anybody else's because it's mine. And it's like, that's not at all how Christ describes his own ministry, first of all, much less his followers, which is laying down your own interest for the interest of others. So there, now you got me going. But it struck me while you were sharing about Pastor Kurt. Were you part of the search team?
No, I was not. I was too busy building a building across the parking lot.
At CWC. I wondered if you were, because I know that there's some people who would be really encouraged to hear what you said about Pastor Kurt. I know it was a few years that you were between pastors, and served really well by Roger Sparks, who's back in the Classis up in Appleton, but. That's a long process, and
it is.
Seeing the other side, I know you're really thankful for how it went, and there's some churches and Classis hiring for different positions that could use that encouragement. So I was glad you shared that about Pastor Kurt's fit.
I'd served in the late 90s when we were vacant between Adrian Dieleman and Jeff Brower, and I had served on that search team, not as chair but a member. And then I had also been the leader of council during that time, right? And that also was a 2-year period. And I think, and I know as a denomination, we tend to be a more methodical in calling pastors and in our search process than many others. But I also find that it can be a really healthy process. And as you know, there is a grieving period
Right.
when a long-term pastor leaves your congregation. And grief of whatever type takes time. And so it did not, I'll say at no time in those 2 years did I think, oh, this is dragging on too long. It was much more, the Lord knows we need time because we just loved Jeff Brower. We did. He was
Sure.
just an outstanding pastor and fantastic from the pulpit.
Yep.
But then by the time, you know, Kurt accepted our call and he's planning to come, there's just this excitement. And it really is a beautiful thing. And I think our congregation went through kind of a long but a very healthy process to bring us to this point too.
Yeah. No, that's a really good word. And yeah, for the people who need to hear that, I hope they're one of the dozen or so that ends up watching this. I appreciate the time, Mark, and thank you for your faithful ministry to the school and to Classis, Wisconsin.
You're welcome. Thank you for the time. Yeah.